Costa Mesa, California, 1963. Three engineers stand around an old drafting table, sketching a rifle the United States military will never adopt. They call it the AR-18, and on paper it should have conquered the world. Lighter than the M16, cleaner running, cheaper to build, and designed for every army on Earth that could not afford Colt's prices. Instead, almost nobody bought it. Governments tested it, shook their heads, and quietly walked away. But one buyer did want it, and that buyer was not a national army at all. It was the Provisional Irish Republican Army. And within a few years, this rejected American rifle was being smuggled into Belfast, hidden under coats, and fired at British soldiers in the streets they patrolled. This is the story of how a failed American rifle became the IRA's most feared weapon, and quietly reshaped almost every modern rifle the world still fights with today. To understand why the AR-18 even existed, you have to go back to Armalite itself, a small design firm founded in 1954 inside the Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation. Armalite did not build rifles for the open market. Instead, it designed cutting-edge small arms and then sold the production rights to companies that actually had factories. That model produced the AR-15, designed by Eugene Stoner in the late 1950s. But in 1959, Armalite sold the AR-15's production rights to Colt, and Stoner left the company not long after. Before he walked out the door, Stoner had already started tinkering with something else, a 7.62mm rifle called the AR-16, built around a short-stroke gas piston and a stamped steel receiver instead of the AR-15's machined aluminum. Only 3 prototypes were ever built, and then the project just sat there, gathering dust on a shelf in Costa Mesa. In 1963, Armalite's new chief designer, Arthur Miller, looked at that shelved design and saw an opportunity nobody else had noticed. The world was shifting toward the smaller, 5.56mm round the AR-15 used. So why not take everything that made the AR-16 cheap and tough and shrink it down to that caliber? That decision became the AR-18. Miller was not trying to beat the AR-15 in America. By 1963, the AR-15 was already on its way to becoming the M16, the standard rifle of the US military, and that fight was already lost. So Miller, along with George Sullivan and Charles Dorchester, aimed somewhere else entirely at the rest of the world. Most militaries outside the United States did not have the machine tool industry to mass-produce machined aluminum receivers, and they certainly could not afford Colt's licensing fees. So the plan was simple: build a demonstration model in Costa Mesa, then sell production licenses to companies in Japan, the Netherlands, and the Philippines, anywhere with basic metal stamping capability and an army that needed rifles. Armalite would collect royalties, while those countries built and sold the rifles themselves. On paper, it was a brilliant plan. Every part of it made sense, but none of it would last. What Miller, Sullivan, and Dorchester actually built was, by almost every technical measure, a better rifle than the one the Army had already chosen. The AR-15 and the M16 built from it ran on direct gas impingement, meaning hot propellant gas was piped straight back into the bolt carrier to cycle the action. It was elegant on paper and filthy in practice. Carbon fouling built up fast, especially with the ammunition the US military was issuing in Vietnam, and M16 rifles were already starting to jam in the field in ways the Army did not want to talk about. The AR-18 solved that problem differently. Gas was tapped off near the muzzle into a small cylinder, where it pushed a short piston backward about an inch. That piston then drove the bolt carrier through a connecting rod, and no propellant gas ever touched the inside of the receiver. The result was a rifle that ran far cleaner in dirty conditions than the M16 ever did. The receiver itself was stamped from sheet steel and welded together, the same cheap, rugged manufacturing philosophy that had produced the M3 grease gun decades earlier. The bolt carrier rode on two parallel steel rods instead of precision machined surfaces, which made it simpler to build and far more tolerant of mud, sand, and neglect. It was lighter than the M16, and its side folding stock made it dramatically easier to carry. But Miller's team made one decision that would haunt the rifle for the rest of its life. The AR-18 fired the same 5.56mm round as the M16, but from a proprietary magazine that was not interchangeable with it. Any army running both rifles side by side would need two separate supply chains just for ammunition feeding. The U.S. Army actually tested 10 AR-18 prototypes at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Fort Benning in 1964, and the verdict was promising, calling for further development and 29 more test rifles. But the real problem was never the rifle itself. The Army was already committed to the M16. Vietnam was scaling up fast, and there was no appetite left for funding a second 5.56mm rifle from a company nobody in Washington had ever heard of. With the United States market closed off, Armalite turned to the rest of the world exactly as planned, and the rest of the world said no almost as fast. The British Ministry of Defense tested the AR-18 in March 1966 and reported insufficient reliability in mud and sand. But the truth was simpler than the test results suggested. Britain had already committed to the L1A1 self-loading rifle and wasn't actually shopping for a 5.56mm replacement. The trial was less a real evaluation and more a courtesy, a polite no dressed up as a technical failure. Armalite's best shot came in Japan, where the Howa Machinery Company picked up a production license in 1967 and started building AR-18 rifles by 1970. For a few years, it looked like the plan might finally work. Then in 1974, the Japanese government slammed strict new controls on military arms exports, and Howa was suddenly forbidden from selling AR-18 rifles outside the country. Most of the roughly 5,000 rifles Howa had built ended up sold instead on the American civilian market as a semi-automatic sporting rifle, which was about as far from the original plan as you could get. Armalite tried again in 1975, licensing Sterling Armaments of Dagenham, England. Sterling built around 12,000 rifles between 1979 and 1985, and most of those went to civilian buyers too, not soldiers. By 1983, Armalite itself was sold off to a Philippine tool company, and the deal never produced rifles in any meaningful numbers. Add it all up, 22 years, 3 different manufacturers, at least 4 serious military procurement attempts, and the AR-18 had sold somewhere around 21,500 units total. In that same stretch of time, Colt alone had built more than 8 million M16 pattern rifles. The AR-18 had lost by a factor of roughly 400 to 1. By any normal measure, this was where the story should end. A clever rifle that never found its army, quietly forgotten in gun catalogs and military test reports. Except the AR-18's most dedicated user was never going to be a national army in the first place. It was about to become the weapon of choice for a guerrilla war happening on the other side of the world from Costa Mesa. The AR-18's most prominent operational user turned out to be the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and they did not get their rifles through any of the official licensing deals Armalite had spent years chasing. Starting in the early 1970s, the IRA acquired AR-18s and their semi-automatic civilian cousin, the AR-180, through clandestine purchases from American gun dealers, outright theft, and smuggling networks that ran straight through the legitimate U.S. civilian firearms market. And once you look at what the rifle actually offered, it makes a strange kind of sense. The side-folding stock meant a fighter could carry the rifle concealed under a long coat or hidden inside a car, then snap it open in seconds when it mattered. The 5.56 millimeter round had more than enough range and lethality for the close, urban distances of the Troubles, where engagements happened across streets and rooftops, not open fields. And because the AR-180 was sold openly as a civilian sporting rifle across America, spare parts and ammunition were never hard to find. Resupply did not require smuggling military hardware out of some foreign arsenal. It just required a willing gun dealer and a buyer with cash. The rifle earned a nickname during this period that stuck for decades: the Little Armalite, celebrated in IRA songs and slogans as a symbol of the armed struggle itself. It wasn't just a weapon anymore, it was an icon, stitched into the propaganda and folklore of the conflict in a way that the AR-15's own military cousin, the M16, never managed to become for any army that actually carried it. Think about how strange that is for a moment. A rifle that every national military on Earth had tested and quietly passed on had just found the most committed, most loyal user it would ever have. And that user wasn't fighting on behalf of any government at all. The same folding stock that British procurement officers had dismissed as a minor feature in 1966 was now the exact reason British soldiers were facing rifles they couldn't predict, hidden under coats on streets they were supposed to be patrolling. When the Royal Ulster Constabulary started recovering AR-18s from IRA arms caches and arrests, forensic examiners traced many of them straight back to Howa's factory in Japan. The discovery set off serious diplomatic friction between London and Tokyo, and it fed directly into the political pressure behind Japan's broader 1974 decision to choke off military arms exports entirely. That ban was part of a wider Cold War policy shift, not a direct response to one forensic report, but the timing is hard to ignore. In effect, the IRA's own use of the rifle had quietly killed off the AR-18's largest remaining commercial license, the same license that was Armalite's best hope of ever making the design profitable. The rifle that the IRA had embraced had just helped strangle its own supply chain. But here's where the story refuses to end the way it should. Even as the AR-18 itself faded into failure, its design didn't die with it. Over the next 30 years, one Western military rifle program after another quietly absorbed pieces of it. When the British Army adopted the SA-80 in 1985, the gas piston, the bolt carrier, and the bolt inside it were lifted almost directly from the AR-18, with early prototypes literally using Armalite-built upper receivers bolted onto a British lower. The same army that had politely rejected the AR-18 in 1966 was now carrying an AR-18 wearing a different uniform for the next 40 years. When West Germany's Bundeswehr adopted Heckler & Koch G-36 in 1997, the same short-stroke piston and twin guide rods showed up again, this time dressed in German polymer. Japan's own Howa, the very company the IRA had unintentionally exposed, built the Type 89. In 1989, using mechanics directly descended from the rifle it once produced under license. Singapore, Belgium, Taiwan, and even American Special Operations units would all end up carrying rifles built on the same bones. The rifle nobody wanted had become the rifle almost everybody was quietly carrying. They just never called it by its name. Return to that drafting table in Costa Mesa, 1963. 3 engineers had no idea their rejected rifle would end up smuggled into Belfast under coats, fired at the soldiers patrolling those streets, or quietly rebuilt into half the rifles modern armies now carry. Made in America, refused by nearly everyone, and turned into a weapon and a symbol by the one group that actually wanted it. The British Army that said no in 1966 spent the next 40 years carrying its descendant anyway. That's the strange afterlife of the AR-18. If you enjoyed this one, consider liking and subscribing for more stories the history books left out.